So, welcome back to the Creating One podcast, and let's pick up where part two of what a successful marriage is or a successful relationship. Many people might think because I get this all the time. My fiance died when I was 26 years old. I was a young woman, almost about to finish my certification and go on to the rest of my life, and had planned to spend the rest of my life or his life with together. So I have people constantly tell me when I mention him, "Oh, I'm so sorry, and God will give you another love." I'm not looking for another love. I found my love. Now, if someone comes into my life, they have to come through a certain benchmark that has been set. And that doesn't mean I don't think anybody will come. I just don't have a lot of expectations that anybody will. It's going to take a special, unique human being, and I'm not sure that person exists. And I don't really care if that person exists. My calling is very different. My calling is to build successful relationships, which are relationships with God. That's my calling in life. Not getting married. Okay? I had the person already. Now, if God forms and die casts another individual and that person comes this way, then that's different. So let me just go back to, as I was saying, I've never been married. About 5 or 6 of the men that I had as friends proposed. And then, of course, I mentioned my fiance, and that was a departure based upon death. We did not break up. He was the love that I had prayed to God for. And why I prayed for God, because I had spent so many of my years just out here, just blowing around, just, like a little fairy, having fun, and not setting any boundaries in my life. And I met a young man who rocked the foundation of everything. And why that person rocked the foundation of everything is because it caused me to look at and examine all my relationships with my family, my siblings, my mother, and everybody. And I was already examining these relationships before I got the confirmation from this person decades later that they were doing the things that they did and got away with doing the things that they did to me because they were allowed to do them. This person came into my family and saw a lack of support, a lack of guardrails and access to me. This is why I don't care if you have an absent father who has passed on or was not there for whatever reason by his choice, or an absent mother, or whatever. If there is family, you have the commission, you have the charge to protect, to God. Don't sit up talking about people behind their back and giggling and laughing, because what you should be doing is giving them some direction, some correction, and some guidance. Because there are wolves out here. And you don't get to point your finger and say who came in and stole the lamb when there was no shepherd there to guard the sheep. Sometimes it's out of pure innocence. Some people just want to pour into people and not set too rigid of boundaries or whatever. My mother was like that. She was a very loving woman and people loved her, but people took advantage of her because she didn't have boundaries. And so when I learned that boundaries are very important, I tried to pour that back into her. And I kind of already knew that she was kind of loose with her boundaries. I saw how she dealt with certain things, and I realized, to take a different approach. So years later, when I met this young man was kind of wild, off the grid, had some leadership, but he made some movements that were kind of weird. And I didn't realize until I had to take responsibility for why those things did what they did in my life. It is very important to have boundaries. Boundaries, especially when it comes to the Lord. Relationships with God must be a part of your guardrail. That means that you don't wait till after you reach certain levels and get certain roads or go certain distances with people and start trying to bring. If God is in you, you need to put God into the people. If you miss an opportunity to, then you get an opportunity again. You use that opportunity to fellowship and to witness and to bring people into fellowship with God, witnessing His word, teaching His word, instructing people, applying it, all those things. But I made a lot of mistakes, and I really didn't fully understand the degree of the mistakes, but I knew this. I listened to that person, and I wasn't going to do what I did before. I wasn't going to make that mistake again, but I really wasn't quite there yet. So then I met this young man, and I just meet people all the time. There was once a time I was dating multiple men at the same time. Dates are dates. That's not a relationship. You're not single. You're just dating. I mean, you're not married. You're just dating. And this one was me dating older men because I felt like older men has a lot more maturity and they're grounded and they're not, silly and frolicky or whatever. And this was me getting closer to God. Even though this relationship was not my fiance, this relationship allowed me to get closer to God. And so I took a job, interviewed for a job with the school in 1992. And this job was it was a good ways away from where I was. I barely knew the area, but I was vaguely familiar with it. As most schools are, they're tucked into communities. Some of them are not sitting on main roads, so this is pre-Google. This is pre-GPS systems. We were relying on maps back then. Maps and, identifiers and landmarks. So I went to this interview, and the interview was well, but it did not manifest. So I got a call, and I was told, the interview went well, but we have another assignment for you. They decided to go with someone else. And I think they liked the fact that the person lived closer to the school. I lived on the other side of town. And usually they try to get you closer to the school, but they were on strike that year, so maybe they were just trying to fill positions. And so I went to this interview. It wasn't that many miles away. It was closer. And I met this principal, and we had a conversation, and he went with me. He was like, okay, sure, let's do this. And so I met the teachers that I would be working with, and that's where I met my very, 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 very first soulmate. And when I say my soulmate, this was not a romantic relationship. This was a teacher who I felt much like was my sister. She didn't look anything like me. She was about 15, 20 years maybe or more older than me. Maybe more. And her name was Ann Rose Seeley. And She had 2 children. Her husband worked for the fire department, and she said she used to tell her husband, me and Dranella Moore were like soulmates, and we were. I mean, she was the most kindest, gentlest spirit or whatever, and people were just cruel to her. And you could tell that there was definitely a connection with us, because I was willing to fight a whole army if they even thought about laying a hand on her. And she became ill, and she passed away from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And I remember the day the administrator came into the room. We were packing up her things, the personal items. And the administrator came into the room, not the principal, but the administrator of that department, and said, you guys can't come in and take anything out of this room. And we just were like, look, we weren't having it, because we already recognized that we didn't like the way that she talked to her anyway. And so we basically guarded the door, and like, for no uncertain terms, we told her to get out. And that was myself, her team teacher, and another co-worker. And we got together. We packed up all their things, and she had been out a while, and I went to visit her in the hospital, and she was one of the few people that I would actually visit in the hospital. I don't typically visit sick people, but I wanted to will her back. And she didn't have a real conversation with me about her illness, but I felt like this was going to be it. I can't even remember how I found out. I think I found out either from a coworker at work, or the family member called me or something. I can't even remember. It's been so long. I'm sorry. But when she left, I knew I had lost my best friend. And I know there are many people who I've gone to school with who probably thought that they were my best friend. But the thing that helped get me through it was the fact that I had another best friend. Because when I got to the school, I also met my fiance. And before we became betrothed, we ate lunch every day. We talked. We just had a wonderful relationship. It was the most purest relationship I ever had. I set the boundaries. I wasn't interested in getting involved in another romantic relationship, because I'd been hurt. I'd been confused. I was on a path that I didn't know where I was going. I was possibly hurting other people. And I didn't want to hurt people. People were nice to me. I just didn't want to hurt people. I didn't want to treat people the way people had treated me. And so this year, we're now in 1994, I decided that I take him out of the cage, so to speak. And we went on our first date. I'll never forget it. It was on Veterans Day. And it was a wonderful beginning. But again, I set the boundaries. And I didn't set those boundaries because I knew what those boundaries actually were going to lead to. I set those boundaries because I didn't like having a relationship with anybody that I worked with, because I didn't want people in my business. I set those boundaries because I was still healing in a lot of ways from relationships that didn't manifest, that was confusing to me. I thought I was on the A train and ended up on the D train. And then I met someone who was perfect on paper, but it just wasn't moving purposefully. It was almost like they were waiting for me to make all the decisions. And I wanted to make sure that the person that I married, they could be my friend. They could be someone I could talk to and, confess my sins to. And in a way they kind of was, but the quality of time that we spent together wasn't growing and manifesting into the relationship that I was seeking. And when I met my fiance, I didn't know he was going to be my fiance. I was completely vexed by his personality. He was flirty. He was very much what I would consider to be a charmer with the ladies. And I I just wanted no parts of that because he reminded me of someone else that I didn't care for very much at that time. And so I proceeded with caution. But at any rate, fast forward, as I began to get clarity and gain clarity about the progression of this relationship, I was finding myself having conversations with God. Because before this relationship came, I did some very bad things to get people away from me. I said some very bad things to get people away from me. I did what I needed to do to get people away from me. And so my fiance was the confirmation from God that if you do as I ask you to do, follow my commandments, forgive those who trespass against you, I will heal you. And God did. Because it was through my fiance that I decided, okay, yeah, I'm going to finish this certification. Because at first I was kind of vacillating. I was like, maybe I'll switch up and do a postbachelor's in something else. Maybe I'll do something in a whole other field. Maybe I'll go back and finish. So I didn't know. My whole foundation was shifting because the experiences that I was having put me on a different path than when I originally started out from high school. So I was still figuring it out, but narrowing the focus. I was establishing myself into a career. And I figured, well, teaching was a great job for my mother to raise kids. So I think I'll do it. I think I can do that now. And I wasn't far off from the credits. And after my fiance passed away, I grieved for a little bit. But not a long time. I regrouped. And I got myself back because I had fallen off a fellowship with God because I didn't know what he was doing. I was like, I don't understand you. I'm not getting you, God. You're not listening. You're not hearing. You gave me something. You took it away. Come on. You didn't even tell me it was going to be leaving. So I wanted to know why God had pulled this card on me. So in order to find out why, I had to keep seeking him further. Because I was still what I would consider to be a baby Christian. I had been fellowshipping and reading God's word and had a student Bible and everything, but a lot of relationships were leading me towards God, greater understanding of God. And as I gained more wisdom and knowledge in God, many more things started to be confirmed for me. And as with each passing decade, I was able to see things clearly, recall things, go back and say, yeah, and confirm things because my trust and belief in God grew. And with those elements of growth, my discernment increased. So would you consider that all those relationships that led up to me meeting my fiance, would you consider them all failures? All of those relationships were like bricks on a road that ordered my footsteps towards God. They were people who taught me about life and what I wanted and what I didn't want. And if these relationships grew me and they drew me closer to God, how can they be failures? How can they be deemed unsuccessful relationships? How would I have been able to grow even in that relationship and after, had it not been the walk towards God that led me to my fiance? So the goal of life and your human interactions are to bring you closer to your purpose and to God. And the only relationships that are failures are the ones that turn you away from God. Many of those relationships, as I have mentioned, some of them those people are still alive. They remain in their own space, reaching towards their relationship with God. And they're with some other people, raise beautiful families. Would you call those relationships unsuccessful if their departure from me gets them closer to God? Your purpose is to get closer to God. Everyone's purpose is to get closer to God. And not every person that you meet is going to get you to what you want, but get you closer to God.